Saturday night is my busy night, and tonight is no different. Now you'll notice all the hockey memorabilia in this area has been taken down, packed away, getting close. So I want, as much as I like to have all the set look like the normal set, we're getting close. So I want to make sure that as much as packed as possible. Starting on Monday, we can start putting stuff in the new house. So we're going to start doing that. And, make it so that we've got movers coming in to help. But by the time the movers get here, hopefully they only have to work for a couple hours, because movers get to be kind of expensive if it takes longer than a couple of hours. Well, they're expensive anyways, but, if it gets done, it gets done, right? First up tomorrow, Hockey Day in America, Hockey Day in the United States. I always laugh when they say Hockey Day in America, only because as a Canadian, I'm part of North America, and I consider myself to be part of America as well. So they say, it's Hockey Day in America. I go, you're darn tootin' it is. Oh, you mean the United States. Okay, I'll sit in the corner. Montreal, coming off the loss tonight, they go in against Florida. They're 31-20-7 now, whereas Florida's 24-24-8. Now, what I wanted to do tonight is, because we're looking ahead to the trade deadline, I wanted to look at what's ahead, not what's behind for this preview. Over their next 5 games, coming out of this game, Montreal plays at home against Columbus, at home against Philly, then they go out on the road and they play Toronto, New Jersey, and Detroit. So they don't have a horrible schedule, and Florida's good for them on the back end of a back-to-back, because Florida is nowhere near as good as Tampa. And I don't think Florida fans are going to get upset with me for saying it, although Florida's been playing pretty well lately. Florida 24-24-8 over the next 5 games after this one. Well, they're still at home for a while. They're at home against Buffalo, Carolina, and LA, and then they go to Colorado and Arizona. So between Montreal, Buffalo, and Carolina, over their next 3 games, Florida could very well influence how the playoff race goes. And while they're not in any position to make it, they can absolutely have an influence. And for Montreal, this is a must-win. They're at 69 points. They are 1 point ahead of Carolina. They must win this game. Their power plays, well, Montreal's has been talked about for all the wrong reasons at 13.1%. Florida's power play is excellent at 25.8%. Their problem's been more along the goaltending side of things. Goaltenders, tomorrow I expect Niemi for Montreal. Price is now 23-15-5 with a 915 save percentage. Niemi's 8-5-2 with an 893 save percentage. It's the back end of a back-to-back, so I expect to see Niemi. For Florida, I kind of expect Luongo here. There were no confirmed goaltenders at the time I looked today. Luongo's 12-13-1 with an 895 save percentage. Reimer's 11-10-5 with a 901 save percentage. So you could make the argument that Reimer's the better goalie and should go in here. Either way, for Florida, they're playing out the string. Now, I went out on a limb today and I said, all right, who are the MVPs for each team? This way people can argue with me about it. My MVP for Montreal, Shea Weber. Since he came back, it's made a complete difference. 34 games played, 9 goals, 12 assists. It proves to Montreal fans have been trying to say it to me in the comments. Shannon doesn't pay attention. No, I do, and I understand that Shea Weber's made a complete difference. Despite the fact he's only played 34 games, it's been a huge difference since he came back. On the Florida side, Barkov is their MVP. 56 games played, 19 goals, 34 assists. Strong as an ox out there. Plays really well at both ends of the ice. I think this could be the year that we see him get the Selke. My favorite, and I'm not going to just go with my standard favorite, but favorite player of mine, who I don't talk a lot about, Montreal, it's Jordy Ben. 57 games played, 4 goals, 10 assists, 14 points. He's also one of the few Montreal players I actually really, really like. So there's some guys in Montreal I'm not a big fan of. Colton Sevier I went with in Florida because the obvious one would be Vetrano, but Sevier, 49 games played, 5 goals, 9 assists, 14 points. Very good fourth line forward, good depth guy. Can kind of do a little bit of everything, and there have been times over his career where he's had to jump up, and he's been okay with that. Over their last 10, Montreal's 5-3-2. They've lost 3 in a row. They are the number 1 wild card. Florida's 6-4 in their last 10. They're 12 points back of the playoffs. Montreal's won both meetings between these teams this year. So we'll see if they can do it again. Next up, Rangers. New York Rangers 25-24-8. They're in against the 30-21-7 Pittsburgh Penguins, who are suddenly out of the playoffs. And the New York Rangers, knowing that, are going to take absolutely zero mercy on those Pittsburgh Penguins. Over their next 5 games, the New York Rangers, They have a spoiler role they can play as well, not just against Pittsburgh, but they go into Carolina next. Then they're at home against Minnesota and New Jersey, so they can kind of ruin Minnesota's day too. Then they go to Washington, and then they're at home against Tampa. So Washington, they can have a role with that as well. On the Pittsburgh side, their next 5, they're at New Jersey after this one. Then they come home, they play San Jose, and then they go out on the road for those next 3 games at Philadelphia, Columbus, and Buffalo. And of course, at Philadelphia, that's your outdoor game, and that should be a barn burner. Absolutely a barn burner. So for them, they can absolutely get themselves back into the playoffs with wins over Philly, Columbus. That could go a long way, but they have to watch a trap game against a Rangers team and a New Jersey team after that. So that's the thing. Sometimes when you look and you go, well, they've got an easy schedule. They might see it as an easy schedule, and they might lay off. They might let up just a little bit. Power plays, the Rangers 21.4%, Pittsburgh 24.5%. Goaltending, I kind of expect Georgiev here, to be honest. He's 9-9 with a .907 save percentage. Lundqvist is 16-15-8 with a .907 save percentage as well. It'll probably be Lundqvist. I expect DeSmith, because of what happened with Murray today. DeSmith is 13-10-5 with a .916 save percentage. Murray is 17-10-1 with a .913 save percentage. My Rangers MVP is Mika Zibanejad. 57 games played, 25 goals, 31 assists, 56 points. He's been on fire for the last month and a half. Sidney Crosby for the Penguins because, of course, 25 goals, 44 assists. My favorite that I don't talk about would be Shea. 54 games played, 3 goals, 11 assists. I still like Brady Shea, even though the offense hasn't lived up to its advanced billing. He has not been the offensive juggernaut that I think I'd envisioned coming out of his rookie year. On the Pittsburgh side, Bluger. He's only played 8 games. He's got 3 goals, 1 assist, but his name's Bluger. And his name was Theodore Blugers before he came over, and then he changed it to Teddy Bluger when he came over. How could I not look at that and go, you know what? Yeah, all right. Sure. I like the guy. Last 10 games, the Rangers are 5-4-1. They won their last game, but they're 10 points out of a wild card. So they know what they are right now. They're playing spoiler. Pittsburgh, they're 4-5-1 in their last 10. They lost tonight, of course. And they are 1 point back of that number 2 wild card spot. They are absolutely, right now, outside the playoffs. And it is February 16th. And you have to be at least mildly concerned, if you're a fan of the Penguins, at the fact that they are currently residing outside of a playoff spot. Pittsburgh did win the only matchup with the Rangers this year. These teams know each other relatively well over the last forever, so we'll see how things turn out tomorrow. St. Louis. So the Blues, going for their 10th win in a row, they're in against Minnesota. And this is a big game. I mean, if they can hit 10 in a row, 67 points, if they can beat Minnesota in regulation, that backs Minnesota up big time. And Minnesota has got to be worried about teams that are behind them, because they're not playing well enough to stay ahead of them. Over their next 5 games after this one, St. Louis will play at home against Toronto. Then they go to Dallas. Then they play at home against Boston. Then they go to Minnesota again. And then they're at home against Nashville. So St. Louis, bit of home and away going on with them. On the Minnesota side, their next game after this one, they're at home against Anaheim. So if they can beat St. Louis, and then they've got Anaheim coming into town, as long as they play well, they should win that one. They can put some daylight between themselves and some teams behind them. Then they're at the New York Rangers. They're at Detroit. And then they're at home against St. Louis. Again, of course, same as St. Louis is in Minnesota. They play against each other twice in the next couple of weeks. And then they're at Winnipeg. And, of course, Winnipeg has been losing to teams that are below them in the standings over the last couple of weeks. It's been a concerning trend for Winnipeg. But for Minnesota, it's go time. They have to get this figured out. St. Louis, power play, 18.2%. Minnesota, 21.4%. So on that level, Minnesota's got the edge. Goaltending, I expect Binnington, because Allen started today. Binnington's 11-1-1 with a .931 save percentage. Allen's now 17-15-4 with a .901 save percentage. On the Minnesota side, I expect Dubnyk. Dubnyk's 21-20-5. He's going to be looking to avenge that last loss he had that was just... It's not the kind of loss you want to have. Stalock is 6-5-1 with an .891 save percentage. MVPs for each team, I have O'Reilly as the MVP for St. Louis because, I know St. Louis fans are going to say it should be Binnington. Well, 13 games. I can't qualify him as the MVP for the season. Talk to me at the end of the year, then sure. But for right now, I have O'Reilly, 57 games played, 21 goals, 37 assists, 58 points. Parise, for me, is still the MVP for Minnesota when they're going. It's because he's going. They've been losing in part because he's kind of slowed down from where he was early in the year. 57 games played, 23 goals, 26 assists, 49 points. My favorite player on each team, again, these are favorites I don't talk a lot about. Bozak in St. Louis, 48 games played, 9 goals, 14 assists for 23 points. And Eriksson in Minnesota. I'm really pulling for him when Koivu got hurt. To me, the silver lining was, okay, well, Eriksson gets that shot. Might be his last. Let's hope he does it. 58 games played this year, 5 goals, 10 assists. Those numbers aren't great. Overall, those numbers aren't great, but he's been better lately. Over their last 10, of course, St. Louis 9-1. They've won 9 in a row. They're third in the Central. They're 8 points behind second. They have games in hand on second, though, and they're 2 points ahead of the number 1 wildcard team in the West. On the Minnesota side of things, over their last 10, they're 3-4-3. They've lost 3 in a row, and they are the second wildcard, 3 points behind the number 1 wildcard team, who are the Dallas Stars. And Dallas not doing a whole lot to keep space between themselves and anybody below them. Minnesota's won both meetings this year. Let's see how things turn out in the third meeting. And then, of course, leading into the fourth meeting. If Minnesota can win this one and the other game with St. Louis, they're going to feel a lot better about their chances. All right. Next up, Buffalo. You want to talk about teams that aren't happy with how things are going lately? Look no further than the Buffalo Sabres. And yet, they still have that chance. But that loss against the Rangers kind of feels like a gut punch. 28-22-7 is the record. They're in against the New Jersey Devils, who are 22-28-8, and they're well aware they're playing spoiler as well. Not playing it particularly well in some games, but they're still a spoiler. Over the next 5 games, Buffalo's fighting for their lives after this one. At Florida, then they're at Tampa. Then they're at home against Washington, then they're at Toronto, and at Philly. This game and the Florida game, they really have to win, because after that, they've got 4 games that are pretty darn tough. No matter what way you look at it, it's pretty tough for Buffalo from here. On the New Jersey side, again, playing spoilers. At home against Buffalo tomorrow. Then they're at home against Pittsburgh and Ottawa before they go on the road and play the Rangers. Then they're at home against Montreal and Calgary. So they have a spoiler role to play there as well. Power plays, Buffalo's at 18.3%, which is actually lower than the 19.1% that New Jersey's firing at. A little bit of a surprise there. Goaltenders, I expect Hutton. I think the magic with Ullmark's kind of gone. Hutton's 15, 16, 3, 9-10 save percentage. Ullmark, 13, 6, 4. He also has a 9-10 save percentage. So Buffalo needs another big game from a goaltender here. I expect Kincaid, although Schneider won his last game, so maybe Schneider goes in. Kincaid's 15, 17, 6 with an 892 save percentage. Schneider's now 1-7-2 with an 873 save percentage. Look, I know that at the end of this year, Schneider's going to be remembered for having a miserable year. I just don't like the 0. Does he get bought out? What happens to him at the end of the year? I don't know. But I didn't like that 0. It just sucked for him. You could tell it was bugging him. The MVP for the Sabres is Eichel. 54 games played, 18 goals, 43 assists, 61 points. On the New Jersey side, it's been Hischier. I could argue Taylor Hall if he'd played more games, but for me right now, it's Hischier. 54 games played, 17 goals, 25 assists, 42 points. And at the very least for New Jersey fans this year, Hischier's really kind of come into his own. Favorite player that I don't talk about on Buffalo, I went with Reinhart. I know I talk about Reinhart a bit, though. 57 games played, 13 goals, 37 assists, 50 points. On the New Jersey side, I went with Drew Stafford. 33 games played, 2 goals, 6 assists. He's rounding out his career. He's finishing it off, but Stafford I liked for the fact that he was able to play almost anywhere in the roster. I know those days are over, but I still pull for the guy. Last 10 games, Buffalo's 4-5-1. They lost their last game. They're 5 points back of that number 2 wildcard. The math's getting dicey for Buffalo. New Jersey's also 4-5-1 in their last 10. They won their last game. They're 16 points back. Buffalo won the only meeting between these teams this year. So, overall, the numbers favor Buffalo, except when you look at how far they are out of the playoffs. This is desperation time. This is when Buffalo has to play their best hockey, or they're not going to get in there. It's just not going to happen. Next up, Philly. So the rematch is tomorrow. Philly and Detroit rematch from today. They put up 11 goals today, which means tomorrow they'll put up like 3. because that's kind of how these things work in the NHL. We go in, we're like, all right, take the over on this one. This what's the go over? We're like 6.5 goals. Yeah, they're going to score more than that, and then they score 3. For Philly, this is a big game because if you've beaten Detroit, if you can beat them twice, you can get a little bit closer. But the math for Philly with playoffs doesn't work very well either. They're 27, 24, and 7 right now. Detroit's 23, 28, and 8. Over their next 5 games, Philly has to go home and play Tampa next. Then they go to Montreal. Then they're home against Pittsburgh and Buffalo, and then they're in Columbus. So it is a tough schedule. They don't play a team that's not going to be desperately trying to get points after this one against Detroit. Detroit's next 5, they're at home against Chicago. Then they continue that homestand against Minnesota, San Jose, and Montreal. Spoiler to be played. Then they're in Arizona for that 5th game. Power plays. Philly's brought their power play up the last few weeks. It's now up to 17.7%. It was down around 14 a couple weeks ago. The power play for Detroit's at 16.4%. They had an excellent power play early in the season. It's really dropped off. I expect Talbot in here because they've announced Talbot, but the site I use doesn't say. Like, I use Daily Faceoff, and they didn't have him as confirmed, but it's supposed to be Talbot. Hart is 12-6-1 now with a 921 save percentage. Easy for me to say. 12-6-1 with a 921 save percentage. Talbot, 10-15-3 with an 893 save percentage. On the Detroit side, I guess you start Bernier. He's 6-13-3 now with an 892 save percentage. Howard, 17-15-5 with a 913 save percentage. And still likely to be on his way to town. MVPs for each team. I know I get flack for saying this, but I still think Couturier is the most important person on the Philadelphia Flyers roster. I'm aware that Giroux outscores him, but for me, Couturier's, when he's going, they win. 56 games played, 24 goals, 28 assists, 52 points. Larkin for Detroit is their MVP. 58 games played, 24 goals, 31 assists, 55 points. My favorite on Philly, that'd be Travis Konechny, who has 17 goals and 18 assists for 35 points in 58 games. On the Detroit Red Wings, I'd actually really think it over. And I went with Green, who from the blue line this year has played 37 games. He's dealt with injuries, 4 goals, 18 assists. I respect that he stayed in Detroit and he's willing to mentor the young kids. I respect that. Over their last 10, of course, Philly's 8-1-1. They've won 2 in a row again after that setback against Pittsburgh. And that setback against Pittsburgh just feels so big because they're 7 points back of that number 2 wildcard spot rather than 5. And on the Detroit side of things, over their last 10, they're actually 5-4-1. They lost their last game, of course, in overtime, but they do have 5 wins in their last 10 games. So they play the spoiler role well. But they're 14 points back of the number 2 wildcard, and Philly has won both meetings now between these teams. So odds are things probably stay the same tomorrow, and that's probably it for Detroit's season against the Flyers, because this will be the 3rd and final meeting between these two teams that reside in the same conference, not the same division. Last but not least, Washington goes in against Anaheim. This is lopsided on every level, and I don't know that I have any faith in Anaheim pulling off any kind of upset over on this one at all. And I say that being as kind as possible, but Anaheim lately, it's been just a disaster. That's why Bob Murray's behind the bench, right? Over their next 5 after this one, of course, Washington then goes on to L.A., so it's the whole California trip for them. Then they go to Toronto, then they're in Buffalo, then they go back home to play the Rangers in Ottawa. So that's tough, going from L.A. to Toronto to play on the road. Whereas for Anaheim, this is the end of the homestand. Now they go back out on the road after this one. They go to Minnesota, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, and then they're home against Chicago. The good news is they seem to be able to beat Vancouver. The bad news is everything else. Well, Calgary, traditionally they have a good record against Calgary, but we'll see, because Calgary needs all the points they can get to hold off San Jose for that first spot. But Anaheim, it's getting tougher and tougher to foresee them actually making it to the playoffs at all. Too many teams to jump past, too many points out. Power plays. Washington's is at 21.1%. Anaheim's is firing at an anemic 14.3%. Totally predictable considering their offense has been virtually non-existent. Goaltending. I expect Copley in this one because it's Anaheim. I would expect Holtby against the Kings. Copley's 12-5-3 with a 903 save percentage. Holtby's 20-14-4 with a 908 save percentage. On the Anaheim side, it'll be Boyle unless somebody else gets better, whether it's Johnson or Miller or whoever. Boyle's 1-1 now with a 955 save percentage. He's looked pretty good. And Miller 4-2-1 with a 922 save percentage if he's a backup, or Johnson or whoever. Maybe Guy Hebert, who calls every game, maybe he can go down and play backup too. MVP, of course, it's Ovechkin for the Capitals for me. 57 games played, 39 goals, 27 assists for 66 points. On the Anaheim side, I had a hard time finding an MVP. Here's how I figured it out. I went, you know what? If Rickard Rakell plays like Rickard Rakell of last year and starts putting up goals, he's their most valuable player. That's how I figured it out. 45 games, 9 goals, 17 assists. I thought Getzlaf, Now, I know people are going to say Gibson, but Gibson's out. And I didn't want to go with a goalie. I thought, no, I want to go with the most valuable player, go with a skater. So Gibson is the obvious choice for me if I'm going with a skater. I go with Rakell. I wanted to go with Montour as well, but I couldn't figure out a way to make that work. My favorite player on Washington, you know what? I like Connolly's story. I think Connolly's been a good story this year for a guy who was washed up, first rounder, never made it, never going to make it. 58 games played, 13 goals, 17 assists. You know what? Those totals aren't bad. It's not where he was expected to be when he was drafted, but who cares? He's still having a pretty good season. On the Anaheim side, yeah, I had a hard time finding a favorite. Of their current roster, anyways. I'm like, okay, it's not Corey Perry. It's not going to be Getzlaf. It's not going to be Kessler. It's not going to be... And I went down and down and down, and I'm like, okay, well, Kosh is out for the rest of the year. I'll go with Sam Steele. 13 games played, 1 goal, 2 assists. I know he wasn't producing very well. I would have kept him up. Personally, honestly, I would have. Max Jones as well. I liked his moxie in the games I've seen of him so far. So, yeah. Anaheim, it's tough to find a favorite, even though I admittedly do not hate Anaheim like I did last year and the year before and every year before that. Going back to about 2004? 2006? Anyway, getting sidetracked. Last 10 games for Washington, they're 5-3-2. They've won 2 in a row. They're number 2 in the Metro. They are 5 points out of first. They're 2 points ahead of third place Columbus. On the Anaheim side, they're 2-8 in their last 10. They lost their last game against Boston. They got shut out. That's after they shut out Vancouver. And they're 7 points back of a wild card. Anaheim did win their matchup in Washington this year, if that matters. But odds are probably doesn't. Anaheim's really, really fallen off. So, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just tap upon this video. And you're all set for Hockey Day in America. If you didn't know it was Hockey Day in America, now you know. And knowing is half the battle. I'll talk to you again soon.